Hello, how are you? My name is Michelle. I'm 51 years old. Before I died, I lived in New Jersey. I had a life full of dangers, but I faced and overcame them all. Jesus delivered me from them all. There were difficult times, a lot of pain and fear, but Jesus came and held my hands. Now I ask you to listen to my Savior and stay until the end. I'll come back at the end of the message to talk to you.
I am Jesus Christ, the beginning and the end, the one who formed Michelle in her mother's womb, who numbered every hair on her head, and who walked beside her every moment, even when she didn't know I was there. Michelle's life was not easy. She faced storms, heartbreak, betrayal, fear, and silence. But even in the darkest valleys, I was there. Not once did I look away. Not once did I leave her side. There were moments when death came close, too close. But I said, not yet. Because her story was not finished. Because her purpose was not complete. Because her time had not come. I gave her 9 divine deliverances, 9 moments where death reached out its hand, and I stopped it. I protected her, even when she didn't see it, even when she didn't feel me. Michelle did not die a second before her appointed time. She died on the day I determined, not a moment early, not a breath late, and on that day I welcomed her home with open arms. Now let me tell you the story of Michelle, the one I carried, the one I defended, the one I loved, until the very end. I remember the moment Michelle was born. The world barely noticed, just another infant in a crowded hospital in New Jersey. But all of heaven was watching. I had been with her since before her mother knew she was there, shaping her in secret, preparing her for a life that would touch hearts in ways even she would never fully understand. As her tiny body came into the light, something shifted. The doctor's face changed, the room filled with attention no one wanted to speak aloud. She wasn't crying, she wasn't breathing. Fear moved through the room like a cold wind. Her mother, exhausted and frightened, cried out for her baby. Nurses moved quickly, voices rising in concern, then in panic. It was as if the air itself had left the room, but I was already there. I was closer than anyone else. I leaned in close, whispering into Michelle's spirit, "Not yet. Breathe, little one. I'm not finished writing your story." And though the cord had wrapped itself around her neck like a thief trying to steal her first breath, my hand gently removed what human hands could not see. They tried to revive her with tools and measured steps, but what they didn't realize was that I had already touched her. As I hovered over her body, I placed my hand on her tiny chest. It was still, but I could see every heartbeat I had planned, every sunrise she would witness, every person she would love. I saw her running in parks, crying in dark bedrooms, laughing in diners, praying on bathroom floors. I saw her full life, and so I gave her breath, not just oxygen, but purpose. Her lungs filled. The first sound she ever made echoed like music in heaven. That cry, sharp and sudden, brought chaos to stillness. Relief swept over the room like a wave. They would say it was medicine or quick thinking or luck, but I know I was the first to hold her, though no one saw me. And I smiled, because I knew the battles ahead would be many, but she would never fight them alone. You see, even before she could speak my name, I was calling hers. Even before she understood what danger was, I was already shielding her from it. From that first moment, Michelle became a testimony wrapped in human form, a miracle cradled by time. And though the doctors moved on to the next task, and her mother wept tears of joy, I lingered a little longer, watching her eyes flutter open for the first time. In that room, no one could have imagined the things she would face. The moments when she would come within inches of death, the times when she would feel forgotten or lost. But I already knew, and still, I chose her. I chose to place my protection around her. I knew that one day, when she looked back on her life, she would realize how many times I stepped in without fanfare, without her ever knowing my name was written over the rescue. Michelle was not born into comfort. There would be pain, there would be struggle, there would be seasons where even love felt far away. But what she would always have, what no one could ever take, was me. I would walk with her through fire, through silence, through fear, through joy. I would never leave. I made that promise the moment she gasped for air, the moment heaven and earth collided inside her lungs. That first breath was sacred. It was not just the beginning of her life, it was the beginning of a journey she would walk with me. Even when she doubted, even when she ran, even when she fell, I was already writing her redemption into every chapter. Her life would not be easy, but it would be beautiful, and it would be full, because I would be the author. And so, while the nurses wrapped her in blankets and passed her to trembling arms, I stayed close. I watched as her mother whispered her name for the first time, Michelle, and I smiled. Because names have meaning, and I had written hers in my book long before the foundation of the world. She was mine, she was chosen, she was held. This was only the beginning. There were still many moments ahead, narrow escapes, divine delays, silent miracles. But on that day, when death tried to steal what I had ordained, I reminded the world that I alone give breath, and I alone decide when it ends. Michelle was born, and with that breath her story began, and I would be with her in every word of it. The years passed, and Michelle grew. By the time she was 6, she had already tasted some of the quiet sadness the world can give a child. Her home was small, tucked into a tired apartment complex on the edge of Newark. The wallpaper peeled, the heaters clicked all night, and the windows let in more cold than warmth. But still, she found ways to smile, building pillow forts, watching cartoons, singing to herself when no one was listening. She didn't know it yet, but I watched her with the kind of love that doesn't blink, not even for a second. That night, the sky was restless. Wind rattled the windows, and the hum of traffic in the distance seemed to grow louder with each hour. Her mother had worked late and barely had enough strength to tuck her in. Michelle fell asleep, wrapped in a blanket that had once belonged to her grandmother, the only piece of comfort that felt steady in a world that kept shifting. But as the city slept, something terrible stirred in the dark below them, a spark, a wire, a small flame behind a wall. No one noticed at first, but I did. The fire grew fast. Smoke moved like a silent thief through the halls, creeping under door frames, licking at the edges of their peace. The alarms didn't go off. No neighbor knocked. Her mother was still deep in sleep, worn out from a double shift. And Michelle, she was dreaming. In her dream, she was running through a field with the sun on her face. She didn't hear the crackling wood, the sigh of burning curtains, or the distant panic of people waking to the scent of danger. But I did. Time in that moment felt stretched. One more minute, and it would have been too late. I called to a creature no one would have expected. An old dog from 2 floors down, restless and agitated, began barking wildly. He had never barked like that before. He scratched at the front door of his owner, pulling at the leash, dragging his human out into the hallway. Confused but curious, the man followed the dog through thickening smoke, straight to Michelle's door. I whispered into his heart, "Knock." Now, he did more than knock. He banged and kicked and shouted. Her mother woke in terror. She opened the door to chaos. The neighbor grabbed them both, wrapped Michelle in his coat, and led them down the stairwell just before it was swallowed by flame. Behind them, walls collapsed and glass shattered, but they were already outside. Michelle coughed, scared and confused, eyes wide with the reflection of the fire. She didn't understand what had just happened. She wouldn't understand for years. But I knew. As the firefighters arrived and people gathered in the cold, Michelle clung to her mother's side. Her body trembled, but her heart beat strong, because I had kept it strong. In the ash and ruin that followed, Nothing was left of their apartment. Toys, clothes, drawings, gone. But they were not. And while insurance papers and reports tried to explain what could not be explained, I looked at her and thought, she still has much to do, much to become. You see, not every miracle comes with golden light or angelic choirs. Some come in the shape of a barking dog, or a neighbor who listens to a tug in his chest that he doesn't understand. That's me too. That night, I didn't shake the earth or part the skies. I simply made sure that help came at the exact second it was needed. Not before, not after. Because timing is everything when you're saving someone who doesn't even know they're in danger. Michelle didn't sleep well for a long time after that. The nightmares came often. Fire chasing her through unfamiliar rooms, voices calling her name from behind walls. But even in those restless nights, I sat at the edge of her bed. I calmed her shaking limbs. I held her when no one else was awake, and though she didn't see me, her spirit recognized my presence. That's the kind of love I give, always watching, always waiting, always near. She would carry that fear with her for years, not realizing how it had shaped her, made her more compassionate, more alert to the needs of others, more tuned in to the silent suffering people try to hide. Pain became a teacher, and I became her anchor in it. That night didn't just take things away, it gave her something too, a testimony that would one day help someone else escape their own kind of fire. And so her story continued. Scarred, but not broken. Shaken, but still whole. And I, the one who had breathed life into her once, had preserved it again, because I don't just give life, I sustain it. And Michelle's time was far from over. She was 13 the day it happened, caught between childhood and womanhood, in that fragile in-between place where everything feels uncertain. Michelle had begun to carry questions she didn't have words for yet. Her heart was growing faster than her world could keep up with, and though her laugh still rang out like a bell, it often came from a place of survival rather than joy. There was a loneliness in her that others couldn't see, but I saw it. I felt every ache she didn't share. That morning had started like any other. Rain tapped softly at the window, as if trying to be gentle. Michelle packed her schoolbooks into her backpack and tugged the hood of her jacket over her head. She didn't mind walking in the rain. It gave her time to think, to dream, to hide a little. She took the long way home that day, not knowing that a small detour would bring her inches from the edge of death. But I knew. There was an old footbridge she loved, weathered wood, rusted railings, a relic from a time when the town still cared about things like beauty and charm. Most people avoided it. It creaked when you stepped on it, groaned under weight, whispered warnings no one wanted to hear. But to Michelle, it felt like a secret place, like something only she understood. That day, with the rain picking up and her shoes soaked through, she ducked under its cover, grateful for a moment of stillness. She stood there for several minutes, watching the water swirl below her, lost in thought. The wind had grown stronger, tugging at tree limbs and slamming shutters on distant windows. A flash of lightning lit the sky. She counted the seconds. Then came the thunder. But it wasn't the storm that worried me. It was what was shifting beneath her feet. The bridge, weakened by years of neglect and rain-soaked rot, was preparing to fall, and Michelle had no idea. I watched as one of the bolts loosened, as the left beam began to tilt. One more moment, one more breath. If she stayed any longer, it would have swallowed her whole. She would have plunged into the raging creek below, struck by broken wood and cold steel. But I whispered gently to her spirit, the way I had since she was a child, "It's time to go." And without understanding why, Michelle turned and stepped off the bridge. 10 seconds later, the center of it collapsed behind her with a violent crack. Wood splintered, iron twisted, water sprayed up like an angry wave. She froze, spinning around, eyes wide with disbelief. Her heart raced. The spot where she had just stood was now nothing but wreckage and river. People would later say she had incredible luck, but it wasn't luck, it was me. I had called her away from death again. She didn't know how close it had been. Not really. She would talk about it for a while. How strange it felt, how shaken she was, how her knees didn't stop trembling until she got home. But she didn't see my hand, not yet. She didn't realize I had steadied the beam just long enough, that I had shielded her mind from panic, that I had breathed safety into her next step. You see, when I preserve someone, I don't always do it with lightning bolts or parted seas. Sometimes I save them with quiet instincts, with nudges, with unexplainable urges to move, to leave, to speak, to stop. That's me too. Not every miracle roars. Some whisper, and that whisper is enough to keep a daughter alive. Michelle would carry this memory with her longer than she realized. It would surface years later in moments of doubt, reminding her that something had always been watching over her. Even when she wasn't sure she believed in anything, the broken bridge became a symbol in her soul. That danger doesn't always look like danger, and safety doesn't always make noise. And so she walked home that day, soaked and shaking, but alive. The storm continued overhead, but inside her, something quiet had changed. She had come close to the end again. And once more, I had stood between her and the edge, because her time hadn't come, because I had more for her, because I loved her far too much to let the story end there. She was 17, and the world had started to lose its innocence in her eyes. Michelle was smart, kind, and full of fire, but she was also searching for love, for belonging, for a place where she felt seen. Like so many young hearts, hers was open, vulnerable, craving something steady. That hunger led her into spaces she didn't always understand, around people who wore masks so convincing, even she couldn't tell what was real. But I could. There was a boy, older, charming in the way that danger often is. He said the right things, laughed at the right moments, noticed the pain she never said aloud. To Michelle he seemed safe, maybe even good. She didn't know yet that evil often learns how to dress itself in soft voices and pretty smiles. She agreed to go with him to a party one night. Nothing unusual, nothing wild. At least, that's what she thought. But I knew what waited behind the door. The music was loud. The lights were low. People moved like shadows, talking in corners, drinking things they couldn't pronounce. Michelle stood near the wall, uneasy. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, but her body tensed. That was me, that was my spirit, nudging her heart, whispering, "Be careful." But she wanted to believe the best. She wanted to trust. And so, when he took her hand and led her down the stairs into the basement, she followed. The room was cold. The lights dimmed even further. No one else was down there. He locked the door behind them. She laughed nervously, tried to make it light, but her heart was pounding now. When he pulled the knife from his jacket, small but sharp, her breath caught in her throat. The smile was gone from his face. His voice changed. She froze, paralyzed by fear, thoughts racing so fast they blurred. But I was already there. I moved before he could. I filled her with courage that didn't come from her. I put fire in her lungs, power in her voice. Michelle screamed loud and fierce, startling him just enough. Upstairs, someone heard. Someone came. The boy ran. Help arrived. The door opened, and Michelle, though shaking and crying, was still whole. She didn't know how she had found the strength. She didn't know it was me. But I had wrapped myself around her the moment the threat appeared. That night, she sat in the back of a police car with a blanket over her shoulders, trying to hold her body still. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were blank. But she was alive. She didn't know that the darkness had nearly claimed her, that it had crept that close, that the story could have ended in that basement. But I had declared, no, not tonight, not this way. She was mine, and I would not let evil write her ending. What the world saw as a scared girl who escaped a bad night, I saw as a warrior rising from a battlefield. She didn't feel strong, but she was. She didn't feel protected, but she was. Because I never left her. Not for a second. I watched the whole thing unfold, heart breaking, hands steady, and when the time came I filled the room with a presence stronger than violence. She didn't fight alone. She never would. Afterward she would struggle, she would question herself, blame herself. Wonder if she had done something wrong. That's what pain does. It tries to plant lies in the soft soil of your soul. But I kept speaking. I kept whispering truth into her heart, over and over. It wasn't your fault. You're not dirty. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're still mine. This moment became a deep wound in her story. But wounds can become wells. From this pain, she would draw strength for others. She would know how to recognize danger. She would become a voice for the silenced. She would carry wisdom her years couldn't explain. I would turn what the enemy meant for harm into something holy. That's what I do. And still, the story was only beginning. She was 17. There were years ahead, trials, triumphs, more battles, more miracles. But this one, this night in the basement, would mark her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. And I, her savior, would keep walking with her one step at a time, never letting go. She was 24, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, barely breathing. Life had become a blur of movement. Train rides, late shifts, phone calls that always came with bad news. Michelle had grown stronger, wiser, but also more tired. She smiled less. She prayed less. And yet I loved her no less. Even when she was too weary to reach for me, I was never far from her. In fact, the more silent her lips became, the louder my protection roared around her. That night the snow had come suddenly. Thick, blinding, relentless. Michelle left work late, already exhausted. She should have waited. She should have taken the train. She should have called someone. But she was stubborn, and the thought of her own bed pulled her forward. The streets were quiet, ghostly. Her small car shivered beneath the weight of ice, but she drove anyway, carefully, nervously. She was used to handling storms, but this one was different, and I knew it. The GPS told her to turn left down a road she didn't recognize. It looked fine at first, just another icy stretch of pavement lined by trees. But that wasn't a road anymore. The storm had washed out part of the path earlier in the day, eroding the bridge that once connected both sides. It was gone now, collapsed into a frozen ravine below, swallowed by snow, hidden from sight. To anyone driving, it looked perfectly intact. But I saw it for what it was, a trap. She pressed the gas. The tires moved forward. 5 more seconds, and she would have gone over. No railing, no warning sign, no way to survive that fall. But in that instant, I placed my hand on her steering wheel. Her phone, which had been silent the entire drive, suddenly lit up with a loud, piercing ringtone. Her mother. It startled her so violently that she jerked the wheel. The car skidded, slid sideways, and slammed into a snowbank just feet before the drop. The engine cut off. Everything went still. Michelle sat there, heart racing, breath stuck in her chest. She answered the phone with shaking fingers, confused and half angry. Her mother didn't know why she'd called. She'd just felt the urge. That's how I work sometimes. Through urges, through rings in the night, through mothers who still pray even when they think their children have stopped listening. I used the ring to save her life. She stepped out of the car into the snow, boots sinking deep. And then she saw it, the gaping absence where the road should have been, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stared. The fall was at least 30 feet. Water moved beneath the snow, dark and fast. If she had gone over, no one would have known for hours. She would have disappeared into the silence, just another accident in the middle of a storm. But I said, not tonight. The tow truck came later. Police placed cones and temporary barriers. She gave a statement, but none of it made sense to her. The odds didn't add up. The timing felt too precise. She went home that night in a borrowed coat, numb with more than cold. And when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she whispered words she hadn't said in years. "Thank you. That was for me." She didn't say my name, but I heard it. You see, even when she drifted from me, I never left her. I don't wait for people to be perfect before I protect them. I don't withdraw when their faith grows thin. Michelle didn't earn my rescue that night. She received it, because she was still mine, because my purpose in her life had not been completed, because her breath was still needed in this world. She would later tell people that something strange happened that night, something she couldn't explain. She would laugh nervously when she said it, not sure if anyone believed her. But deep down, something shifted. Her faith didn't return in a flash, but a door inside her heart cracked open again, and I slipped through, quietly, gently, like a friend she'd forgotten but still longed for. And so the snow melted, the roads cleared, the world moved on. But I had once again stepped in, unseen but certain, because Michelle still had years to live, still had people to touch, still had wounds to heal and stories to tell. And I, the one who knows the end from the beginning, had already written the next chapter. She was 31 when the pain began. It came without warning, sharp, sudden, and unrelenting. Michelle tried to ignore it at first. She had always been strong, always pushed through discomfort. Life had taught her to endure. But this pain was different. It pulsed through her abdomen like a fire that wouldn't go out. She doubled over at work, clutching her side, her face pale with fear. Co-workers rushed to her, called an ambulance, and she was taken away under blinking lights. I was already in the room before she arrived. Doctors ran tests, blood work, scans. They whispered in hallways and avoided her eyes when they came back in. No one had answers. Her fever climbed. Her breathing grew shallow. I watched her lie in that hospital bed, brave face, trembling heart. Michelle had learned not to panic, but the silence of her doctors frightened her more than words ever could. She stared at the ceiling, remembering old prayers, wondering if she should say them again. She didn't know it yet, but death had entered that room. Her body was shutting down, quietly, efficiently. An undiagnosed infection was spreading fast, too fast. Her blood pressure dropped. Her heart rate slowed. Nurses moved quickly now, masks tight, voices tense. They called in a specialist from another floor, someone with sharper eyes. In the middle of the storm, Michelle's eyes fluttered shut. She was slipping. And I stood at her bedside, my hand over her chest, holding back the final breath she almost gave away. The monitors began to scream. One nurse reached for the defibrillator. Another started a second IV line. Her chart didn't make sense. The numbers didn't make sense. The speed of decline didn't make sense, but I was not confused. I knew exactly what was happening and what was not going to happen. I whispered into the heart of the new doctor, guiding her to the source. She saw it. An abscess, hidden deep behind tissue, poisoning Michelle's system. They hadn't seen it earlier, but now they did. Just in time. Surgery was rushed. Minutes mattered. Michelle was barely conscious as they wheeled her through the sterile corridors. The lights above her blurred. She tried to speak but couldn't. Her soul floated between two worlds, teetering between staying and leaving. But I held her there, gently, strongly. "Not yet," I told the angels who had gathered. "She still has more to do." So they waited with me, watching, guarding. The operation took longer than expected. There was more damage than they'd hoped, but less than there could have been. When they closed her up, she was stable, barely. The surgeon stepped back, quiet with relief, not fully understanding how close it had come. I understood. Michelle had brushed against eternity that night, but I had placed my body between hers and the grave. Her time had not yet arrived. When she woke up in the ICU, surrounded by tubes and machines, her throat dry, her eyes unfocused, She didn't know what had happened. She only knew she was still here. Nurses smiled, relieved. Doctors used words like critical window and narrow margin. But none of them could explain the timing. None of them could account for the nudge that led that doctor to look again just before the collapse. That was me. It had always been me. As Michelle recovered, I spoke softly to her spirit. She felt me again, not in a church, not in a sermon, but in the silence of her room. She began to talk to me, not always out loud, but in her heart. Her questions were honest, her gratitude hesitant, but it was real. Pain had opened a door that pride never could, and through that door, my love poured like warm light. This moment, this hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and midnight fear, became holy ground. Not because it was clean, but because it was where death came close and was denied. Because it was where Michelle was reminded that she mattered enough to be rescued again. Not because she earned it, but because she was chosen, still, again, always. And as her body healed, so did something inside her soul. She began to sense that her life was not random, that her breaths were not borrowed, that maybe, just maybe, there was something more for her, something eternal, something beautiful. And I smiled. Because I knew she was beginning to remember who had been walking beside her all along. She was 37, and by then she had learned how to walk with quiet courage. Life had tested her, bent her, bruised her, but never broken her. She had rebuilt herself after sickness, walked out of fear stronger than before, and whispered prayers again, even when she wasn't sure I was listening. But I was. I always was. And on a cool spring evening, when she least expected it, I would once again show her just how close I had always been. Michelle had just left a friend's house in Newark, New Jersey. They'd been catching up, laughing, remembering, talking about how life never quite turned out, how you expect it to. She hugged her friend goodbye, walked briskly to her car, keys ready in her hand. The sun had dipped below the skyline. The streetlights blinked on, and someone was watching her. I saw him before she did. I knew his anger, his addiction, his instability. I also knew what he was holding beneath his jacket. He followed her across the street, quiet, deliberate. She unlocked her car door and slid into the driver's seat, still unaware. Then he moved fast. He yanked the door open and shouted at her, eyes wild, voice shaking, a pistol pointed straight at her chest. Michelle froze. The world stopped. Her heart thudded once, loudly. She raised her hands, tears already forming. "Take everything," she said. "Please don't shoot." But he wasn't just there to rob her. He wanted power. He wanted control. He wanted fear. And he had a weapon that made him feel like a god. But he wasn't God. I was there, right there. Time bent in that moment. Michelle felt it, a sudden stillness, like a thick, invisible wall had dropped between her and the chaos. The man shouted again, louder this time, but she heard something else, a voice, not from the outside, but inside her soul. Mine. I said only 2 words, "Don't move," and so she didn't. She stayed completely still, eyes locked on his, even as her body shook. I wrapped her in my presence, like armor unseen. And the man, for reasons he himself could not explain, began to back away. He stumbled, cursed, pointed the gun one more time, then turned and ran. Michelle sat frozen, trembling, lungs begging for air. She didn't chase him. She didn't scream. She just whispered over and over, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." And I heard every breath of it. I was the one holding her heartbeat steady. I was the reason that bullet never left the chamber. I was the one who commanded that man's hands to fail. When the police arrived, they were stunned. "You were lucky," they said. "He's done this before. He usually doesn't leave without pulling the trigger." But it wasn't luck. It was grace. It was divine interruption. It was me once again saying, "Not today. She still has a purpose." That night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Michelle wept. Not out of fear, but from the weight of what almost happened. She knew it could have ended so differently. She knew she should be a headline, a candlelit vigil, a sorrowful post on social media. But instead, she was here, alive, unharmed, held. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't question why. She knew. She knew. This moment rewired something deep in her. From that day forward, she walked with a new awareness, a holy weight. She no longer said, "Maybe God is with me." She said, "I know He is." Her faith was no longer theory. It was testimony. Her story carried power now, the kind of power that makes darkness tremble. And though the memory remained, the fear, the gun, the man's eyes, it never owned her, because I had rewritten the ending. Not just to save her life, but to show her that no weapon formed against her would prosper. And as she moved forward, wiser, braver, closer to me, I knew she was starting to understand. She had never been alone. Not then, not ever. She was 43 when she moved into the little townhouse on the edge of Trenton. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. After years of shared spaces, renting rooms, and living on the edge of stability, she had finally found a place to breathe. It was quiet, cozy, filled with second-hand furniture and first-hand dreams. She decorated the walls with verses she wasn't sure she still believed, and photographs of people she missed. Michelle was healing, slowly, tenderly. And I was there in every detail. She had begun to pray again in whispers, not out of fear, but out of longing. There were nights when she'd light a candle and sit in the silence, just hoping to hear me. What she didn't know was that I never stopped speaking, sometimes with words, but often with warnings. And one night, when the wind blew harder than usual and the old heater rattled louder than normal, I was speaking again. This time, through a flicker, a scent, a hesitation. Michelle had gone to bed early that night, drained from the week. She lit her favorite lavender candle, read a few lines from a worn devotional, and drifted off. The heater in the hallway, old and temperamental, clicked on just after midnight. A loose wire sparked behind the panel. It only took seconds. Flame caught insulation, then framing. Smoke crept like a thief through the vents. The fire began its hunt. The smoke detector was silent. The batteries were old. No alarms, no warning. But I saw it. I felt the danger drawing close. And so I nudged her, gently at first, a stirring in her spirit. She shifted in her sleep. The smoke thickened. I whispered her name. She didn't hear it with her ears, but her soul heard. Michelle sat up suddenly, heart pounding. She smelled it. Heard the faint crackling. The room had already begun to fill. Panic set in, but I steadied her. "Go," I whispered. "Now." She grabbed only what was near, her phone, her keys, and the small Bible beside her bed. She didn't stop to dress. She didn't try to save anything else. She ran barefoot down the stairs, coughing, eyes burning. Just as she opened the front door, the fire reached the ceiling beams, and the back of the house ignited with a boom that shook the walls. Outside, neighbors gathered, shouting, calling for help. Michelle stood on the frozen grass, trembling, wrapped in a stranger's coat. She turned and watched as her home, her sanctuary, became a wall of flame. But she was alive. Not because of chance, not because of good instincts, but because I woke her, because I was in the room before the fire ever was. The fire chief later said she had less than 3 minutes, that it was a miracle she woke up when she did. That without working alarms, there was no reason she should have made it out. But miracles were never unfamiliar to me. They are the rhythm of my love. And on that night I chose again to say, "Not yet. She is still mine." Michelle cried that night, not just because she lost everything, but because she realized how much she hadn't lost. Her life, her future, her story. As she watched the flames die down and the embers glow like forgotten stars, she held that little Bible close to her chest and whispered a prayer. It was short, but it was real, and I received it like a symphony. The weeks that followed were hard. Insurance claims, borrowed clothes, the ache of displacement. But Michelle carried something stronger than fear now. She carried awareness of me, of purpose, of how close life and death often stand, and how quickly I can part them when I choose. The fire had tried to take her, but it failed, because I had plans the fire couldn't touch, and so she walked forward again, barefoot but brave. And though her house had burned, her faith was reignited. The flame I placed in her long ago still burned, not with destruction, but with destiny, because she still had breath. And with every breath, I still had more to show her. I'm Jesus Christ, the one who formed Michelle in her mother's womb, who numbered her days before even one of them came to be. From her first breath to her very last, I never left her side. Through every moment of danger, every tear-soaked prayer, every hour of silence, and every second of celebration, I was with her, guiding, shielding, loving her more deeply than she ever fully knew. I held her hand when no one else could see it. I calmed storms she never even felt. I silenced threats that never reached her ears. Michelle did not leave the earth by chance or by tragedy. She died only on the exact day, in the very hour, and in the perfect moment that I myself had appointed. Not a second too early, not a moment too late. It was not a loss. It was a homecoming. She did not slip from life. She stepped into eternity. And when her eyes closed for the final time on earth, they opened to behold my face, radiant, welcoming, filled with joy unspeakable. She now lives where death cannot touch her, where fear has no voice, where pain has no shadow. Michelle is home, fully alive, wrapped in the fullness of my presence, more radiant than the sun, more at peace than she ever dreamed. Her story did not end. It began anew here with me in glory. Her trials were temporary, her deliverances were purposeful, and now her eternity is secure, because I, Jesus, chose her, loved her, and never let her go. My beloved son and daughter, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any deliverance of my children.
I'm back, and I'd like to thank you for watching my life story until the end. You can avoid these difficulties I've faced at times. You're building your life. There will be some deliverances from Jesus, near-death experiences, but Jesus will keep you safe. To my family, I'm grateful for the time I spent with you. Today, I'm here with Jesus. Very happy. A big hug from Michelle. Leave a comment to let me know what you thought of my life.